we do have laws, great laws like the Personal Data Protection Act coming up. And at the same time, we have laws like the Online Safety Act coming up, which is very repressive. So in a futuristic world, a law like the Online Safety Act, unfortunately, in every discussion we get into this, is extremely problematic.
We have more than 40 legislations that are dealing with labor, right? So then if a foreign investor is to come, for that person looking at all those 40 legislations would be a hassle. We'll say that if a Tesla car, which is autonomous, hits another vehicle, so then who is going to take the liability, right?
For example, recently the government came with the Small Claims Court Act, which is supposed to reduce the case backlog from other courts for lesser value disputes, where there's a huge scope for settlements to be promoted.
Hi, welcome to another panel discussion with the Shine 50 inductees. And today we're going to talk about lawmaking and how to make laws more sustainable and futuristic in a good way. Today I have with me two very esteemed ladies, Alosha and Saranee. I am Piyumani Ranasinghe, and we're all attorneys here. So I'll give the ladies the chance to introduce themselves. But before that, I work as a legal and a policy researcher at the Center for Policy Alternatives, and also a visiting lecturer at the Department of Law, Peradeniya University. Alosha?
Hi, I'm working as a senior lecturer for a private institution, and I'm also an entrepreneur.
So I'm an attorney at law and also an international mediator, also a visiting lecturer, but more focused on promoting ADR in Sri Lanka.
Great. I feel like we have a lot to talk about on the topic today, especially because all of us have something to say about laws and lawmaking, and just about generally the legal system in Sri Lanka, because we're all trained in it. Just to start off with maybe Saranee first. When we talk about lawmaking, the legal system in Sri Lanka, generally the sense is that it's not satisfactory. There are lots of flaws, and a large part of it is also the outdatedness of our legal system and the fact that it doesn't suit the world that we live in today. Let's look at one area, right? Like, let's look at tech, or let's look at even women's rights or land issues or labor. What are your thoughts on why the legal system has these flaws?
So Piyumani, since we're talking about future and law, I first want us to, just think of the fact that the key thing about future is that we think it's tomorrow, but every second world is changing, right? The change is the only constant that we see. So everything keeps changing. So how responsive are we and our legal system to this change? I think that's where we fail most of the times, that we fail to be responsive. And when we make laws, also, how much have we thought about these upcoming changes, right? So from my subject area, I just thought maybe I'll talk about that a little bit. So change is happening so fast. So for people, I don't know, I think this is relevant even for 100 years ago. The most important thing is time, right? Time is money, we say. So law is always about providing people a safe environment and facilitating them with their life, be it their livelihood, be it the way their safety, be it their decision making, whatever that is. Law is there to give them a safe environment, right? I think we all agree on that. But if it can't actually cater to the needs of people in this changing world, then it's a failed legal system. So I think that's where we see the failure. So why, if I talk about ADR, why should we focus on that is because the current legal system has failed to understand that people need quick solutions.
ADR, by that you mean?
Yeah, alternative dispute resolution methods. Actually, popularly we call now it appropriate dispute resolution. So that does include litigation, but we always focus on what is the most appropriate method rather than sticking into one traditional method. So I think that's one key factor in a legal system. You can have 100 laws, but in implementation, if those laws can't cater to the timely needs of people, then that's a failed system. So I think that is one of the key factors that we need to take into account when we talk about making laws that can cater to people's needs in a constantly changing world. Yeah.
I like how you brought up two things, right? Like number one is law and future. And I think that's not spoken enough, or perhaps it could even be a module that people are taught, particularly because of this fact of the second thing, the time. In our legal system, a key point that you highlighted is that it's quite adversarial. So there is always the need to litigate, but there is no focus necessarily until very recently about the importance of alternative methods. And that is a big flaw as well, right? Where the legal system has fallen short of what could possibly be coming out for the benefit of the people. So Alosha, in the spirit of the benefit of the people, how can a legal system be more people friendly?
Well, I think one of the main reasons why people doesn't approach court, go for litigation, is because they know it will take so much time. So time, like you correctly said, is of course one of the main assets that we have. That's money. So people are reluctant to take matters to the court. So it's not convenient there. The procedures takes a long time, especially the delays. So most of the time there's not a misconception. Of course, I agree with that. If you take a land matter, it will take years to come to the dispute, will be resolved after years, right? So we know there is now technology. Even I have seen that for alternative dispute resolution also, the AI has been tested. So in such an environment, I think we should try to digitizing courts would be something that will really help people. True that our computer literacy might not be the best, but compared to other countries in our region, peers, we are at a good, technologically speaking, we are at a good point, right? So we are doing well. So I think that would really help people. So then court will be more of like an approachable, and then again, a place where really the justice is served. And then in terms of changes of the legal system, I mean, we know that the legislature is the branch of the state that facilitate this. So they are the ones who are amending laws. So then they are the voice of the people as well. So from that perspective, if we can really choose people, the representatives, right representatives to go to the parliament, to the legislature, and if they are really willing to change the legal system of Sri Lanka for the betterment of the people, then people will know that, well, okay, the laws are good and the justice is served by the law. So people have lost the faith in law mostly because of these two reasons, I think, because of the delays that are there in terms of the procedure, especially where we can go for digitizing, and we can, like, of course, use a lot of technology in hearing cases. And then the other hand, people have lost the faith in law. So then if we can really bring laws that really address the concerns of the people, and now the society has changed, still we have laws that are quite archaic, like so old laws, like there are still ordinances in existence, right? So if we can address those, I think it will be really a legal system where people will thrive and do better.
I really like how you brought, especially the last point about political will. I think it's where you were heading with the idea of representation and representative democracy being an important part to ensure that there's sustainability in legal reforms, and also changing the law and amending it as per needed. And that these representatives also need to be people, working in the interest of the public, not necessarily in their own personal interest, which is something, I think up for question in Sri Lanka, maybe not so much of a question as well. I want to draw on that a little bit and talk about the difference between lawmaking and policy making. And I think this is something we've we've also spoken with each other before, specifically on the issue of, well, how do we have lawmakers sitting in a legislature bring about policy changes that are far more, sustainable and futuristic, and based on those policies that are perhaps more broader, more open-ended, than easily able to be changed, and then base laws on such great policies, which is kind of the system that operates in other countries like the UK and so on, right? So before you bring up a law, you have white papers, green papers, and so on. What are your thoughts, Saranee, on this idea of the distinction between lawmaking and policymaking? Do you think we see it in Sri Lanka?
So, Piyumani, my thinking on that this is not necessarily a new concept. I see our supreme law, the Constitution of Sri Lanka in itself, gives us several directive principles, which are essentially more like the policy base on which Sri Lanka is supposed to take its cause forward, right? But what has happened essentially is we look at these directive principles as something that's not enforceable, those are just principles. They're just there. They don't tell us anything. That's the sort of reading that goes into these principles. But had we given enough emphasis to these principles that are embedded in the supreme law of this country, I think that's the starting point for Sri Lanka to go from, having policies, broader policies based on these essential constitutional principles, which has given us direction, and then based on those, you come up with relevant laws for each areas, each topic, when the necessity arises. I think at least the founders or the drafters of the current constitution actually have had some sort of an idea, at least I think so, when I look at these directive principles. So I don't think we can say that we had never thought of it. I think it has been there, but it's just that nobody had really understood the value of having a policy, and how a policy is much more stronger and has much more ability to give direction to laws and make laws more futuristic, because policies are very much, they are lively. At least they're supposed to be, right? They're supposed to look into the future. They're supposed to keep those doors open so that others can build on it, right? So I think it's there, but we have to build on it and we have to put it into practice, Piyumani. I think that's the other thing about law in Sri Lanka. Sometimes it's not that all the laws that we have are bad. It's not that they're bad. Sometimes it's just that we have not given effect to the entirety of it. We have been picky. We have just implemented the easy parts, whatever that we are used to, right? And we have just let the other parts slide away, maybe because of resources issues or whatever the issues, we have not focused on those. So I think that's where the balance needs to be drawn. Indeed, principles, policies are essential if we are going towards a society where there are laws that really cater to people and the changing needs of the society future, in other words. But we need that practice, the implementation, the doing.
I think that's so important, especially because in the past 2 years, we've seen with, now, of course, at the time of recording this, we have a new government, but the then government have, introduced a range of policies, over 100. And it was stated also that we've done over 100 laws. Sorry, apologies, 100 laws. But then the part of implementation comes very strongly there, right? How much of this is practicable? So, for example, the Economic Transformations Act, now a law of the country, has certain goals in it entrenched, which I wonder are more suitable for perhaps a policy framework as opposed to a law framework, because this is law now. And how exactly is this practicable? And if those goals are not reached or no one realizes them, and these are government bodies, what are we going to do to hold anyone accountable, right? So in that lens of implementation, Alosha, I would just want to check with you on what you think are the gaps that exist with the legal system, the implementation aspect. Why is it so problematic when it comes to actually implementing? Are we lacking the human resources, or are people not aware, or is that just an excuse? What do you think?
One main reason is the lack of integration. I think we have different departments. We'll say the Judicial Services Commission, and we have the Justice Ministry, and we have our forces, police. So then when it comes to serving justice, administering justice, the judiciary is not the only body. There has to be a proper integration because law is applicable to everybody. So in terms of integration, I think there are a lot of issues to be addressed. So very simply, I think there is lack of coordination between sometimes the police and the judicial system. Right. So then starting from there. So then if those two lacks coordination, I think the rest of the departments and other government bodies and everything is of course something that we have to address in future. But that is one thing. And then again, when we are to look at why our judicial system is the way it is, the lack of flexibility, I guess. So because coming back to the point that it takes time to create pass a new law in Sri Lanka, and especially in terms of implementation also, if you have to change the procedures again, it's again amending the legislations. So then it's very time consuming. So if we can really address on certain matters, I mean, of course, the parliament takes time, and then all the stakeholders should be given a chance to address the matters and all that. That is true. But if we can really come up with a system where we can cut that amount of delay, so I think this would answer the greater problem of delays in policy making and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
I'm not so sure whether I answered.
No, you definitely went in a direction that I think is useful for our conversation. Number one being the fact that there are delays within the policymaking cycle, but it ought not to be considered as delays caused by the time needed for public consultation, which I think is often less than needed. There's no need assessment. There is no scope for the public to engage extensively with laws. And these are important facets of the lawmaking cycle, right? These are laws that govern the people. So there's the constant need to go deeper and ask the most vulnerable groups also for how these laws potentially going to impact them. That's important. But I think the other aspect that you highlighted was more perhaps something that we can talk about is the lack of coordination between government entities and the lack of integration, which is again a problem because of bureaucracy and the fact that the law creates so many commissions, so many institutional bodies. Sometimes they don't interact so much with each other, or they just don't have the human there's no internal or external integration mechanism within our government services as well. And you brought a great example with, for example, the law enforcement bodies. Saranee, in your experience, and you advocate for alternative dispute resolution, knowing that there are these flaws within the formal legal framework, what do you think, what are the critical reforms needed to address some of these challenges then?
So, like I said earlier, Piyumani, we do have certain laws in Sri Lanka right now which actually have answers to some of these problems, right? But once again, the problem is we have come up with those laws without thinking of the implementation stage, right? Now, for example, recently, the government came with the Small Claims Court Act, which is supposed to reduce the case backlog from other courts for lesser value disputes where there's a huge scope for settlements to be promoted. But now this also went into the same court system where judges are already overburdened. So they do not have the capacity in terms of the time and resources to actually give effect to this law. So ultimately, we have to question whether this law has been able to achieve the expected outcome. If it has not, it is ultimately a waste of all the resources that went into it. So obviously we see that gap, you see, it's about actually it's not just on the policies, it's more about the need and the ability. If you have done it without understanding the actual, okay, let's say the need was identified, it's right, it's a very important law and it had identified the need very correctly, but the ability and a way forward. Now the key issue I see here, Piyumani, is in Sri Lanka I think we don't have the practice of piloting things, but if you look at other countries, we see this trend of first doing assessment, right, of the needs, the capacities, the abilities, right? Everything is first assessed. Then you come up with a pilot to see whether a proposed framework can work and change or address those needs, right? If that pilot works, then you work on a law, a more fixed, because a law is something that you at least expect to live for at least 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So sometime it's a enforceable mechanism, right? But if you have not tested it, right, you don't know whether it can work or not, right? But you expect the moment a law is passed, you expect it to do magic. It won't happen, Piyumani. Unfortunately, we have seen that it's not going to work. So many people, they wait till the law is passed. Then you have groups who criticize it. Then you have groups who come and defend it, saying, oh, this is the reason why it didn't work. But that is not going to serve the people, because ultimately the law is supposed to serve the people and the community. So I think I come back to the point that you highlighted. Before we draft laws, before we pass laws, we have to go into that research, right? And come up with those policy frameworks, and then come up with frameworks that you pilot, test, and see whether what you're going to do and propose can work. And then go and turn it into a law. Because once you pilot, Piyumani, the other thing that happens is it also kind of cultivates the seeds for an ecosystem. Everybody who participates in that pilot gets to know a change is happening, right? So that actually gives some awareness to everybody who's going to involved in this change. Then you get to hear from those parties as to what are the things that are good in it, what are the things that are not good in it, even if you don't go into a separate consultation, because as we know, sometimes in consultations, only those who are highly literate and, who are into research, who come and give their input. But this way, you actually go into the real stakeholders, okay? And then you get their feedback. So you have to have a scientific approach to this, Piyumani. I think we have to follow a scientific approach in lawmaking if we really want to have the full benefit be given to people. So when we don't do that, again, it's a failed system. So I think this is where the greatest problem is. I think for us, let's look at the laws that are already there and then work on those, how to get them implemented, and then think of the other laws. Now, before I conclude my answer to your question, Piyumani, I must also say that if we think all problems in this country can be solved by passing 100 laws, that's not really true, It's only an illusion, or, you're just thinking that it'll work that way, but it's not going to solve problems. We need an ecosystem change and then a law to support it,
No, I very valid points. And I think what struck to me the most is how much detail that you went into, especially in terms of the stakeholder consultation aspect, right? And the validity that you give to community knowledge. So you don't end up just making laws from a top to bottom approach, and you ensure that everyone's voices are heard in the policy lawmaking cycle. So a critical reform then is, focusing on the process. And what about the subject areas, Alosha? Where do you think the law needs to change the most in Sri Lanka?
So in terms of subject areas, addressing the concerns, especially the economic concerns we are having, that we are not doing so great in terms of economy, and we need to bring FDIs, and then we need to empower women, so then they play a huge part in our economy and all that. So I believe labor laws should be changed, especially since this has been one of my research areas. We have more than 40 legislations that are dealing with labor, right? So then if a foreign investor is to come, for that person looking at all those 40 legislations would be a hassle for sure, right? We have to make it quite easy for the investors to, it has to be welcoming for them, right? So that is one of the root causes as to why I believe that we don't get FDIs. When we look at our peers, we see that India is doing so well, right? And then Bangladesh, most of these countries are getting a lot of FDIs, but we aren't, because our labor laws are quite, I would say, old. That's one thing. And then again, I'm not saying that we should go for like a hire and fire policy like that of US, right? Not going to that extreme, but we have to have that balance where the concerns of the employer or the investor is also addressed properly. It's not just about the employee, right? So because during the time where most of these laws were enacted, we had most of more like a socialistic system. So then that is one area I'm thinking that needs to have some reforms. And then again, I believe even in terms of we have made quite a progress in terms of intellectual property laws and personal data, but I believe we have a long way to go in terms of AI, right? So then not just locally but internationally also, we have to harmonize the laws that are to do with AI. So that is an area I think where we have to definitely look into, because the future is going to be about AI automation. And we'll say that if a Tesla car which is autonomous hits another vehicle, so then who is going to take the liability, right? So we don't know. I don't think Sri Lanka has a law, but maybe Tesla might have their own set of for what they get the manufacturer's liability. But we have to get ready for the future, right? So then I think such things, the metaverse, AI, and then autonomous cars, automated cars, all these areas we have to look into, and if we are to think our laws to be futuristic. So that's one thing. And again, one thing I must highlight is that in Sri Lanka, we have this idea that most of the time a lot of people look into laws wearing political glasses, right? If the government that they supported brings a certain law, they would advocate for it. They would say, we like it, right? But we have to be we have to look at things in a more broader way. Maybe the party that we didn't support it might be in the power as the government, they might bring a good law. So then people have to support. And then I think most of the time law is not just about the legislature. So as people, we also play an active role in lawmaking. So that also the mindset of the people, like we always discuss, should be changed, right? So even though people are to talk about corruption and all that, people also have to look into themselves and think that whether they are the people who wait up until, we'll say, 5 p.m. at the offices, or are they the people who go out and do shopping during the lunch break, and also whether they take the liability, right, for their own actions. And then in a more broader perspective, that's again breaking rules and regulations, right? So then that obedience has to be there, that attitude, mindset, that the rule of law, those ideas has to be there in people as well. So then we can expect them from the governance as well. Yeah.
That's a very fair statement. I think the fact that you ensure sustainability of laws and the legal system by also embracing the values of rule of law, democratic governance, and ensuring that you're an active citizen, having a voice in ensuring that laws meet your needs. One thing I want to also highlight, for example, because we are on the subject and because I am from a human rights background, we do have laws, great laws like the Personal Data Protection Act coming up. And at the same time, we have laws like the Online Safety Act coming up, which is very repressive. So in a futuristic world, a law like the Online Safety Act, unfortunately, in every discussion we get into this, is extremely problematic, especially for the public, right? And then we do see that when there is concerns raised, especially with legislations like the Online Safety Act, there is heavy interest passed on to especially the big tech industries as opposed to the actual public interest. For example, the amendment that came in July, there's clear provisions that now reduces liabilities for the tech industries, but still nothing is necessarily done in terms of the public. And their rights are still, it's a very really like problematic implications if the law is enforced. Because the Online Safety Act, I think another critique is that, it goes to our previous point, is it even implementable? So, Sarah, just to drive the conversation to this direction, and this would be kind of my last question to you. How do we strike this balance? We do want laws to be futuristic. We want laws to stand the test of time, but we also don't want laws like the Online Safety Act, or God forbid, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which is supposed to be a temporary measure, but still exists. So futuristic. How do we strike this balance in Sri Lanka?
I think that's actually not a problem that only Sri Lanka has. If I think all of us will agree on that. The real problem, I think, is once again we might have to repeat this 100 times, Piyumani, because once again it's all about where in your policy framework from which these laws come about, how much have you thought of the needs, wants, and the abilities? I think that's where again it is. So, and there when we talk about the most important thing that you spoke of, human rights, right? That is essentially the interests of humans, right? So be it from an equality point of view, be it from a privacy point of view, be it from expression of your freedom of expression, it's always about what do people want and how do we strike a balance between the regulation and giving them their rights, right? How much can we curtail? How much can the state intervene? Is the intervention legitimate, proportionate, right? Those are the key tests that we check against a law to see whether this is actually recognizing and giving importance and, upholding the human rights. So I think to ensure that people's rights are intact as against the new laws that come up, once again, you have to make sure that people are heard before the laws are made, right? So that process, like I said before, that scientific process has to be followed. And it should not be curtailed to simple calling for comments. If they don't come to you as the state, you have a responsibility to go to them. I don't think the state can simply wash off their hands by saying, well, we call for comments. Nobody
sent an email.
Exactly, right? So then we have to take a step back and think everybody is struggling. That's the truth, right? Only a few people, maybe let's talk about it, who are in think tanks or research or, scholars, they will have time to, if at all, sit down and go through an entire draft and understand. And on the other hand, in Sri Lanka, when the laws are drafted, not every layperson can read and understand it, although we expect them to understand the law,
Very
right?
correct.
So how can we expect them to comment on a law? I mean, is it even fair? So state does have a responsibility, at least I think so, some might disagree, to go to them and get that feedback and ensure that whatever the law that you pass is accepted by people, then only they will follow it. You can't be imposing everything that you want on people and expect them to follow them. You make them part of, that's why we say politics is not only for politicians, right?
And the exemption of it shows a lot of privilege, no?
Exactly. Yes, I mean, I agree. So since this is your last question, Piyumani, I will just connect a few things and give you an example of what I always think that maybe Sri Lanka should make this available to our people. Now, we spoke of how tech should be a part of the Sri Lankan legal system, digitization and all of that. I mean, even if we do not go into that extent, so my experience, I work as a volunteer international mediator for the US-based Minnesota Mediation and Restorative Services. Now, what I do is, last night also I did it, I join online to the Minnesota court system. Okay, so we are assigned to different courthouses and we be there as mediators online.
All right.
Okay. And people join the courthouse and the judges, the referees, ask them before putting them to trial, would you like to, they give them the first opportunity to talk to the other party. So the registrar opens a breakout room, the two parties go into a breakout room, they try a settlement. If they fail, this happens during the court time, okay? If they fail, they come back, then the referee or the judge, the registrar asks them, would you like to have a mediator service? This is a second step. Then they send it to us. So I from Sri Lanka mediate matters of US citizens, right? Who are so many kilometers away, right? But I have settled so many cases like that. These are matters that went to court. Just imagine the number of cases that go out of the court system and that do not get clogged in the court system. They get settled. We have mediated harassment cases. We have mediated cases where the parties had disability. Piyumani, I have mediated a matter where one party could not speak. So we had a sign language translator then and there when the need arose. So the registrars work on that. And the other party couldn't speak English. So there was a translator to do that. So everything that was said was translated across in a completely virtual platform. And the other thing is, some of the parties join this court session just over the phone. You don't have to take leave and, travel thousands of kilometers, right? And come. So just over the phone, they have the facility. This is not big tech, this is not rocket science. This is the basic tech.
It's accessibility also, right? During COVID, we saw a lot of things going online, but why can't it revert to that?
Exactly. So having virtual courthouses, at least for minor matters, will take out a lot of financial burden from the government. Similarly, it will ensure access to justice to all people. You spend that money that you spend on physical courthouses on translators, which we don't have at the moment, right? Good quality translators, have them available. Then you don't have to keep postponing. So these are things that we can learn from foreign countries that will not cost you a lot, So countries like us can benefit from systems like that. So that's another step of making law futuristic, if we are going into such techie world and if we are not using the basic thing, which can do so much to so many people, connecting international resources, international volunteer mediators, nobody pays, right? But everybody benefits. So these are options that are available that Sri Lanka can also look at in, giving better access to justice to people.
That is just a fantastic example. And I'm so glad you brought it up, even though we're almost closing time. And I want to add to it before I move to Alosha for her final thoughts. For example, the implementation aspect, right? Another thing that has a hot topic now is asset recovery and, financial crimes. A big part of, I think, Sri Lankan legal system, the enforcement cycle, is that there's lack of capacity to ensure that even if a law comes, you can follow through, that you have officers who are, very capable officers, but they have the resources to engage in these issues, and at the same time they're just not curtailed from doing their work by not, because of bureaucracy or lack of funding or sudden change of government, and you are now a constable, which happened to some of the institutions before. So there's a big, I think, also mind shift change that needs to happen, right, in the political spaces to make sure that law is sustainable and that it's people friendly and that there's no gaps in between. With that, Alosha, for final remarks on the lawmaking, making sure that laws more accessible, do you have any thoughts on civic education in this regard? What can improve to make sure we can bring people to the law?
Yeah. So, a great question, because we know that not knowing law is not an excuse, right? Nobody can say that, hey, I didn't know such law exists, so then please excuse me, simply. So if that's the case, but if we look at our higher education system during the school time, during that 13 years in general, we have not learned anything about law. Maybe for civic, we learn there are 3 branches of state: judiciary, executive, and legislature. So these branches, what they do, that's all, right? But we were never taught about the general legal system. For me personally, up until I went to law faculty, I didn't do political science for A-level, so I honestly had no idea who make laws. I thought it's the lawyers and maybe judges. Well, judges, of course, there's a little bit of a role there, but I thought it's lawyers, right? So that's how Sri Lankans are. Majority, I think, belongs to that category. I mean, can't blame them. I think to bring people to be responsible citizens, we should make sure that they are aware of the laws that are in existence. To do that, we can maybe in grade 10, 11, if we can sort of include certain parts of law, like generally what is civil law, criminal law, what are the codes that are there, first instance, civil code, criminal codes.
And that there's alternatives available.
Exactly, you don't have to straight away jump for litigation, right? Most of the people think there aren't any, right? People aren't really aware about ADR, alternative dispute resolution. And then even maybe Saranee mediation is something some people might know, but that is also not many know, right?
They know about Samatha Mandala, but not at the professional level that you can do mediation.
Yes.
And also, I think there's a lot of importance given to litigation, perhaps from all the TV series as we see, but in real life, when all of us went to court, that was so not the case. So you were saying.
Yeah, so then in such an environment, I think that needs to be done first. So then including law to the education system, whereas, so then when you pass out from grade 13, then you know something about the law. And then that also, I think, will change the mindset to be a responsible citizen. And then if we can teach our kids, our children, how you can take part in lawmaking, what's your role, how important it is for you to appoint the right people to represent you in the parliament. So those things has to be included in our education system. I think we can start from there. And then again, if you look at the general legal education, what we learned in our law faculties, that also, I think it's the high time we sort of make some reforms. Now it's the high time we introduce AI related laws. It's the high time we maybe remove Roman law, right? I'm not saying it's boring, but we should know where it started, but not that it's the most important kind of law to learn at the moment, because the world is changing. So we have to change the legal education as well. So then, especially I think lawyers. So then if we are to talk about AI laws and all the new laws that are coming, so the blockchain and the new technologies, to draft certain laws, people should be aware, especially the lawyers and the legal draftmen. They have to be aware about what blockchain is. So if we don't know what blockchain is, how we are going to implement laws regarding regulating those. So then I think we can start from there.
And the possibility of, like you said, virtual courtrooms, right? That's not so far-fetched. Very simple, opening a Zoom. I think this is something that's very needed, and you're very correct. There's a lot of importance given to sometimes big changes that need to happen, but in reality some smaller changes can lead to bigger impact, making life easy for people and I'm all about bringing law closer to the people. So what you just raised are very, very important points.
Piyumani, I'll just add one more thing, that legislature needs to actively listen, right? I think that's one of the key points in lawmaking. I know of people who are within the institutions in this justice system who have proposed so many legal reforms. Sometimes they keep proposing, but the legislature turns a complete, they go deaf. It's unfortunate. Sometimes they pretend they don't hear any of those things.
And there's selectivity, right?
Exactly. And then they go and do something that has sometimes no value, or that something can't work. So it's important that this happens. Like, again, we go back to the same thing. Connect all the stakeholders, listen to them, and then go into lawmaking. I think that's critical.
Yeah, and add to that, when it comes to the researchers we do, I think since we all three are researchers, do we really, like what happens to our researchers? We say like we recommend this to be done, that to be done, like, but at the end of the day, like it just goes to publications and that's it. Right? So, like, where's that integration? Like you correctly pointed out, we have to connect and then address all these concerns together with the stakeholders.
Very correct. And you don't even need to look for necessarily foreign jurisdictions. The research happens very much in the soil of Sri Lanka. I know all of us are engaged, like you very correctly said. So I think with that, to wrap up today's session, if I may take the final call on what we discussed. We discussed the importance of process, ensuring that stakeholders are consulted, and it's horizontal, not necessarily vertical. And then we discussed the importance of making smaller changes that's doable, and having that actionable element to any proposed legislation to ensure that changes can actually happen, that it's not a far-fetched dream for another 100 years to be realized. And lastly, to ensure, people connect with the legislation, and the cycles that have started don't end with the change of government, but legislature, people also have have the capacity to demand from the legislature that these processes continue and laws remain sustainable and future-oriented, but at the center of all of it, people-centric.
Yes.
So with that, we're going to conclude this panel discussion. Thank you very much, ladies. It was vibrant and very insightful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.